This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you Episode 4 of Season 3 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Westford Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, January 22nd, 1910. I'll elaborating on what was happening in Westford in 1910. The first section this week is the Westford Center section. Miss Rose Fish gave a most enjoyable song recital at the town hall last Thursday evening. There was a good-sized audience, among whom were many who have appreciated previous recitals given by Miss Fish. She was in excellent voice, and her selections were varied and rendered in her unaffected and pleasing way. She was assisted by Miss Mary Ellis, violinist, who gave several selections with much skill and expression. Albert E. Prescott, Westford's well-known music teacher, accompanied Miss Fish on the piano. To show those who are interested what is being done in the line of butchering in Westford, E.J. Whitney, inspector, reports that for November and December, he has inspected 164 veals, 72 hogs, 32 cattle, and 2 cattle that were condemned. Mrs. Caroline Atwood passed the 89th milestone of her life's journey last week, Wednesday. Mrs. Atwood is somewhat shut off from the cheerful give and take of daily life with deafness, and during this winter has felt the weight of advanced years somewhat. But she is surrounded by 3 devoted daughters who minister to her comfort and happiness with filial fidelity. Mrs. Atwood and her daughters lived at 4 Graniteville Road, or what is now 4 Graniteville Road. Another who remains with us in life's late, sunny afternoon is Mrs. James Hildreth, who lives at North Westford at the home of her daughter, Mrs. Frank Chandler. Mrs. Hildreth observed her 92nd birthday Friday of this week with comfortable health and the same cheerful outlook on life that has characterized her all her long life. A Mr. Cunningham, a nephew of Mrs. James Spinner, who comes from Mrs. Spinner's native country of Scotland, has been visiting here in this village. Mrs. Frank E. Miller has been for several days this week at a private hospital in Roxbury, where she went, accompanied by Dr. Wells, to undergo X-ray observation. Next is the Tadmuck Club section. Considering the weather and traveling, there was a good attendance of the members of the Tadmuck Club Tuesday at the library. Owing to inadequate heating, those present adjourned to the conversation room downstairs, and this made a pleasant meeting place. Principal William A. Woodward was the chairman of the afternoon and had arranged an excellent program, it being the second of a series on Alaska. Mr. Woodward gave a thoughtful and instructive paper on, quote, the history of Alaska and its inhabitants, end quote, which was followed with much appreciation. Which was followed with much appreciation. Miss Edith Lawrence, who was detained by illness at the meeting, was present and gave the paper prepared for that meeting on topographical features. By special request, Mr. Marshall was present and gave one of his Scotch readings in the genuine dialect. Genuine because he was from Scotland. Next is a paragraph on birthday party. It was the 15th birthday anniversary of Miss Pauline Dole last Friday, and the event was made memorable by inviting a group of her school girlfriends for the afternoon and evening. There were games, music, and the merry sociability that happy schoolgirls know how to promote. A delicious supper was served. The guests took their departure at a reasonable hour, earnestly wishing their young hostess many happy returns of the day. Those present were Mrs. Beatrice and Lillian Sutherland, Evelyn Hamlin, Marjorie Seavey, and Hilda Isles. The next paragraph is titled Fireman's Ball. The second annual Fireman's Ball, under the auspices of the Edward M. Abbott Hose Company No. 1, took place on Monday evening at the Town Hall. It was a real success socially and financially, and reflects much credit upon the committee in charge and to those who helped them in carrying out arrangements. The members appeared in their regular regalia of red shirts, belts, and caps, and made a brave appearance. The hall was not specially decorated for the affair, but this bright bit of color was quite decorative of itself. Kittredge's orchestra of 5 pieces furnished good music for dancing, which was preceded by a concert. The Grand March was led by J. Herbert Fletcher, captain of the company, and Mrs. Fletcher. There were many present from surrounding villages, barges coming from Chelmsford and from Ford's Village. The fire companies from those 2 places and from Graniteville were well represented. At intermission, ice cream from the D.L. Page Company was served, with cake solicited at home. The committee in charge were Robert Prescott, John Feeney, and Fred Clement. Next is a section on the Farmers Institute. The Middlesex North Agricultural Society held a Farmers Institute at Westford Town Hall Wednesday, January 12th, under the direction of George W. Trull of Tewksbury, chairman of the Committee on Institutes. Good weather and traveling permitted people to attend in good numbers. A selection by the Westford Grange Orchestra called the gathering to order at 11:30 a.m. An address of welcome by Reverend Charles P. Marshall of Westford was responded to by DeLacy Corkum of Billerica. Mr. Trull then introduced the speaker of the day, George A. Drew of Greenwich, Connecticut. Mr. Drew is a native of this town and a graduate of Massachusetts Agricultural College, whence he went to take charge of a large estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It is a pleasure to be able to record how excellent a statement of methods he gave and how clearly he set forth what he had to say. The appreciation of the audience was very evident. Mr. Drew's subject was orchard renovation. He then took up his subject under the following heads, and I'll just read the heads and not the details for each one. First was pruning. Second was spraying. Third was cultivation. Fourth was fertilization, and fifth was thinning of fruit. And there's a short paragraph that goes with each one of those. A dinner characteristic of the ladies' degree team of Westford Grange was enjoyed by 200 people. The feature of the afternoon was a drawing contest participated in by pupils in the public schools. This is a feature that has drawn much attention at other institutes and was equally as interesting here. The 6 participants were awarded prizes as follows. First, Willie Davis of Ford's Village, 75 cents. Second, Robert Harwood of Littleton, 60 cents. Third, Mabel Sanborn of Ford's Village, 50 cents. Fourth, Delia Cannell of Ford's Village, 40 cents. Fifth, Carrie LeClaire of Ford's Village, 30 cents. Sixth, George Wilson of Ford's Village, 20 cents. The closing speaker was E.C. Earle of Lowell on the subjects Shortcuts in Mathematics. That's kind of a longer description of that program than was given the previous week. The next section is the About Town section. The next Farmers Institute will be held at the Village Church in North Billerica next Wednesday. It is expected that the morning address will be given by Professor Ford of Amherst Agricultural College on corn raising for profit and best methods. The meeting of the Fortnightly Club last week, Friday evening, was postponed on account of the storm. The next meeting will be held next Friday evening, January 28th, at the Wright Schoolhouse. The Committee on Entertainment have invited DeLacy Corkum of Billerica to perform some oratorical feats, and he has accepted the invitation to be present. If anyone feels like sparring him, he is anxious to have them with him on the following question. Resolved that the conduct of mankind is influenced more by what is inherent than by the enactment of laws. He will stand for the law side of this question, excepting insofar as it relates to, quote, standard milk, end quote, and quote, capital punishment, end quote. The engagement is announced of Miss Gertrude Craven of Lowell, formerly of Graniteville, and Robert Elliott of Lowell, eldest son of Thomas H. Elliott, the well-known real estate owner. A new house on Stephen Street, which is in the Highlands area of Lowell, will be nearby future home. Next is the obituary of Thomas Jubb, who died last week at Bennington, Vermont, and will be remembered by the older residents of the town as living some 40 years ago at Westford Corner on what is now the McGlinchey place. While living here, he was an overseer in the Eagle Mills at West Chelmsford, then owned by Isaac Farrington of Lowell. He died on the evening preceding his birthday and would have been 95 years old. The funeral took place last Saturday. Reverend George L. Collier of the West Chelmsford Village Church officiated. George F. Snow had charge of the funeral arrangement. Burial was in the village cemetery on Strawberry Hill, beside the dust of wife and children. He was a native of England. Of his 10 children, only 4 are living. 2 of his sons saw active service in the War of the Rebellion, being a part of the quota of Westford. John, who enlisted May 23, 1861, in Company G, 16th Regiment, and died at Harrison's Landing, Virginia, July 21, 1862. William, who enlisted August 5, 1862, in Company E, 33rd Regiment, and was sergeant of the company. He was in the famous charge at Raccoon Ridge, which General Hooker declared was the greatest charge of the war. It was in this famous charge, while over the breastworks of the rebels, that he had a narrow escape from being stabbed with a dirk, and only the quick action of a comrade and disarmament with the butt of the gun saved his life. He was mustered out of service June 11, 1865. Since the war, he has been a member of the Spalding Light Cavalry and at present of the Cavalry Association. He has beat his war implements into the peaceable pursuits of farming and the rural quiet of Shirley. Next is the Forge Village section. Owing to the snowstorm on last Saturday, ice cutting on Forge Pond was postponed for 2 days. J.A. Healy had a large force of men scraping the pond. Cutting was resumed Monday, and the last cake went into the ice houses Wednesday afternoon. Weather permitting, the Gage Company commenced operation on the Merrimack River Thursday. The ice there is only 9 inches and is inferior in quality to that on Forge Pond. In the evening at St. Andrew's Mission Sunday attracted a large number. The evening service attracted a large number. A special feature of the service was the singing by a choir of small girls. Attired in their little white cotters and scarlet caps, they presented a pretty picture as they marched to their seats 2 by 2. A collection was taken up during the service for the benefit of foreign missions. At the conclusion of the service, prizes were awarded the Sunday school scholars for regular attendance for the past term. The prizes were beautifully bound books by the popular authors and were given by Reverend Thomas L. Fisher. The next item is called Installation, Loyal Self-Help IOOF. That's the International Order of Odd Fellows, Massachusetts Union, held their regular meeting January 3rd, and the new officers were installed by Lodge Deputy William Burnett. The new officers were Charles Eaton, GM. I'm not sure what all of these initials for the officers mean, but I'll read them as given. Charles Eaton, GM, John Edwards, NG, John Shackleton, VG, Frederick Davis, LM, John Baker, RSNG, William C. Derone, RSVG, Charles Flanagan, Warden, William Burnett, Treasurer, Frederick Naylor, CS, William E. Baker, PS, and Harry White, LG. Next is a couple paragraphs entitled Weddings. Miss Emma Orange, daughter of the late Mr. and Mrs. Abraham Orange, and Joseph Perkins, son of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Perkins of Graniteville, were married by Reverend Dorr, which is spelled D-O-I-R, Dorr A. Hudson, at his home in North Chelmsford on Tuesday evening, January 18th at 8 o'clock. The sister and brother-in-law of the groom were the attendants. Miss Orange is a native of this village and is well known. The groom was the second baseman for the Lions and is a star player. He is a very popular young man, and the couple have the best wishes of their many friends. They will reside for a short time at the home of the groom's parents. Miss Orange has two brothers in the Army, William Orange, who enlisted in 1906 in Company I, 11th Infantry, U.S. Army, and is now stationed at Fort Russell, Wyoming, and Joseph Orange, who was on the battleship USS Vermont in the U.S. Navy when the fleet made the trip around the world. This is a reference to Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet that circumnavigated the globe in 1908 and 9. Joseph is now in Company C, 1st Regiment, U.S. Army, stationed at Cavite, Philippine Islands. Both remembered their sisters with checks for a generous amount for a wedding gift. William Wilson, son of Mr. and Mrs. James Wilson, and Miss Rose Toussaint, is a well-known member of St. Catherine's Church, were married in Lowell Saturday afternoon, January 15th. Mr. Wilson was captain of the Lions in the SBL, that's the Suburban Baseball League, and his marriage came as a great surprise to his many friends. The couple will reside in Lowell. Incidentally, the Joseph Perkins that was mentioned in the previous paragraph, his son, by the same name, Joseph Perkins, also lived in Graniteville and was one of the last alumni of Parkerville Schoolhouse. Next is the Graniteville section. The people here are just recovering from another of those severe snowstorms of the blizzard type, something similar to what was experienced here on December 26th. Fortunately, the snow was damp and did not drift so badly as on the previous occasion, and as fine weather soon followed after the storm, it left the road in fine condition for sleighing. It is well that the snow came as it did, as the sidewalks were in a very slippery condition, and walking in the middle of the road was the general order of things. Arthur Joseph, the infant son of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Lammy of this village, died after a brief illness on Friday, January 14th. He was aged 2 months, and he had been born in Canada. Burial was in St. Catherine's Cemetery, this village. Undertaker J.A. Healy was in charge. Joe Wall has recently returned from a brief visit to Boston, where he attended the Master Painters Convention and incidentally took in the sights at the poultry show. Mr. and Mrs. John R. Healy welcomed a little son, Frank C. Healy, who was born on January 16, 1910, to their home in North Westford on Sunday morning. The Ladies' Aid Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church are now making arrangements for what promises to be one of the most pleasing entertainments ever given in this village on Tuesday evening, January 25th. As a special attraction, they have secured that Prince of Entertainers, S. Thompson Blood, quote, the man with the hats, end quote, who has been seen in several of the neighboring towns where he has scored a great hit. Refreshments will be served. Many people from this village attended the Fireman's Dance in Westford on Monday night and had an enjoyable time. It was considered one of the most pleasing events of the season. Many sleigh ride parties from the surrounding towns were in attendance, large delegations coming from Chelmsford and Forge Village. And the last paragraph is called Ice Cutting. Every available horse in this vicinity has been put to work on Forge Village Pond, as the recent heavy fall of snow stopped the ice cutting for a short time, and the full gang was put to work scraping. The cutting has been resumed, however, and under fair weather conditions, it is expected that the full crop will be harvested and housed this week. If the snow has held off a few days longer, the ice company would have surely reaped a great harvest with very little extra expense, and incidentally, we might have witnessed another of those interesting trials of speed between the fast horses. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending January 22nd, 1910. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museumwestford.org. museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.